Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rohmatul Faizah and my ID number is 2019-6121. Here I will explain about chapter 5. There is functional theory about translation. In the era of 1970s until 1980s, there were so many theories about functionalist communicative approach to translation that were developing and emerging, and some of these figures were Katrina Rice and Mary Snell Hornby. The second one is Gösta Holtz-Mantaris. The third one is Hans J. Vermeer, and the last is Christian North. Okay, I will explain one by one. First, I will explain about text type that explained by Katharina Rice. Katharina Rice worked in the 1970s. She built a concept of equivalence, but few the text rather than word or sentence as the level at which communication is achieved and which equivalence must be solved. And her functional approach aimed initially at systemizing and the assessment of translation. And Katharina borrows the category of function language by German psychologist there is Karl Böhler. The first function is informative function, expressive function, and appellative function. After that, Katharina links the three functions to their corresponding language dimension and to the text type or communicative situation in which they are used. And the main characteristic of each text type are summarized by Rice as follows. The first about informative text type. Plain communication of facts. There is information, knowledge, opinion, and etc. The language dimension used to transmit the information is logical or referential, and the content or topic is the main focus of the communication. The second type is expressive text type. She said there is creative composition, and the author uses the aesthetic dimension of language, and the author of sender is foreground as well as the form of the message. And the third one is operative text type. There is inducing behavioral responses, and the aim of the appellative function is to appeal or persuade to the reader or receiver of the text in a certain way. And the last text type is audio-medial text, such as film, visual, or spoken advertisement, which supplement the order of three functions with visual images or music and etc. Okay, after that, text type are therefore categorized according to their main function. For each of these text type, Rice give the example of what she calls is text varieties of text short, now more commonly known as genre. They are typically associated with them. Oh, another point of race prefer there is translation method are reversible. For example, like we might accept a plain prose method for translating the English financial metaphors above into a language where such a metaphorical style was out of place, namely whether the text type and genres can be differentiated on the basis of the primary function. And finally, the translation method employed depends on far more than just text type. The translator's own role and purpose, as well as socio-cultural pressure, also affect the kind of translation strategy that is adopted. So there are theory of functional theory from Katharina Reis, and we move to the next from Mary Snell Hornby. He said about integrated approach. In her book Translation Studies, Mary Snell Hornby reviews an attempt to include a wide variety of different linguistic and literary concepts in an overarching integrated approach to translation based on text type. Snell Hornby comes from a predominantly German and theoretical background that is notably borrows the notion of prototypes for categorizing text type. And she, depending on the text type under consideration, she incorporates cultural history, literary studies, sociocultural, and area study for legal, economic, medical, and scientific translation, and the study of the relevant specialist subject. Snell Hornby explained that horizontally, the diagram is to be read as a series of lines from left to the right with no clear demarcation. This is complemented by stratificational model, proceeding from the most general A to the most specialized F. And this is the explanation. It's all about the integrated approach, and we move to the translatorial action model by Gesta Holtz-Mantaris. The translatorial action model proposed by Gesta Holtz-Mantaris for takes up concept from communication theory and action theory. Her aim, among others, was to provide a model and produce guidelines that can be applied to a wide range of professional translation situations. And he said it is not about translating words but sentence or text, but in every case about guiding the intended cooperation over cultural barriers, enabling functionally oriented communication. And translatorial action focus very much on producing a target text that is functionally communicative for receiver. This means, for example, that the form and genre of target text must be guided by what is functionally suitable in the target text culture, rather than by merely copying the source text profile. And what is functionally suitable has to determined by the translator, who is expert in translatorial action and whose role is to make sure that the intercultural transfers takes place satisfactorily. In the translatorial text operation, the source text is analyzed solely for its construction and functional profile. Various relevant features are described according to the traditional split of content and form. And the value of Holtzman-Taris' work is the placing translation within its sociocultural context, including the interplay between the translation initiator and initiator. Okay, next about Scopus theory. Scopus is the Greek word for aim on or purpose and was introduced into translation theory in the 1970s by Hans J. Vermeer as a technical term for the purpose of translation and of the action of translating. The major work on Scopus theory is called Translatum by Vermeer and translational action in North's translation must be fit for purpose, that is, must be functionally adequate. Therefore, knowing why a source text is to be translated and what the function of the text type will be is crucial for the translation. What the sum of principle respecting the target text? The theory doesn't state what the principle and must be decided separately in each specific case. So, if we use Vermeer's own example, an ambiguity in a will written in French would need to be translated literally with a footnote or comment for a foreign lawyer dealing with the case. On the other hand, if the will appear in a novel, the translator might prefer to find a slightly different ambiguity that works in target language without the need of formal footnote. This would allow the target text to achieve functional equivalence through the creation of an unmarked ambiguity in target text. Okay, last but not least, there is translation-oriented text analysis by Christian North. North, in translation, present a more detailed functional model. There is incorporating elements of text analysis which examine text organization at or above sentence novel. North first makes a distinction between two basic types of translation product. There are documentary translation and instrumental translation. Documentary translation serve a document of a such culture communication between the author and source text recipe, such in the case, for example, in literary translation, where the target text allows the target text receiver access to the ideas of the source text, but where the reader is well aware that is translation. And next, instrumental translation serve as an independent message transmitting instrument in a new communicative action in the target culture and intended to fulfill communicative purpose without the recipient being conscious of reading or hearing a text which in a different form was used before in a different communicative situation. However, she also gave example of other kind of translation where it is not possible to preserve the same function in translation. Okay, maybe that's all explanation about chapter 5, and I hope my explanation is clear, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.